Yeah, I think I sent it out on Friday again. Okay, so chapter 22 is going to be nutrition. A lot of overlap with digestive system. So the whole point of the digestive system, you are breaking food down into usable components. Okay, these components are going to be called nutrients. These nutrients get absorbed into the bloodstream, and your body is then going to use them to do all of the chemical reactions. Okay. All of the chemical reactions in your body, the sum of them is called metabolism. So it's through the process of metabolism that nutrients get transformed into energy, or the bodies can use or store. Okay, we talked about this in chapter 2. Okay, chapter 2, we talked about metabolism being catabolism plus anabolism, aka sum of all the chemical reactions. Now, if you look at this, right, you can see things like your brain. Your brain is doing a lot of stuff. So it makes sense your brain needs a lot more energy than something like adipose tissue. What is adipose tissue? Fat. Okay? So your brain uses a lot more energy than your adipose tissue does. Catabolism, anabolism, we're going to talk about it when we get to proteins. But basically, catabolism, breaking things down, anabolism, building things. Now, with medications, because you guys are going to talk about medications and metabolism and funds, okay? There's a lot of medications that can speed up or slow down the body's metabolic rate. And if you do this, that can impact how quickly drugs and nutrients are going to be processed. Okay, so body's metabolic rate, how drugs and nutrients are processed. For example, the example I always use is thyroid medications. Okay, because if you have hypothyroidism, it can cause you to have weight gain. Hyperthyroidism can cause like significant weight loss, right? So it makes sense that thyroid medications are very like involved in metabolic rate. Okay. So particularly with medications, you need to be looking for weight changes, blood sugar fluctuations, and medication side effects. There's a whole bunch of these. The idea behind this, different medications can impact metabolic rate. I am never going to be like, what is the effect of beta blockers on your metabolism? And that's beyond the scope of this class. This is just to give you guys some context. Now, looking at units of energy, okay? When you release energy, right? So your body is undergoing all of its metabolic processes. You're making energy in the form of ATP. You're using that energy to like clean things up or produce proteins, whatever it might be. Okay. As you are producing that ATP, you are going to create heat as a byproduct. So when we measure energy expenditure, we are measuring it by the output of heat from the body. We have we have one way that we look at specifically with this. Okay. Something called calories. A calorie is going to be the amount of heat needed to raise 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. This is what the body uses as fuel. They do some weird science experiment and they measure it. I don't know the science experiment, but once they do it, they stick that number on a box, and that's what a calorie is. Next, we look at the basal metabolic rate. The basal metabolic rate is going to be the amount of energy that the body needs at rest. Okay, so the amount of calories per day that you need to consume every day. Okay. We're going to talk about the specific effects in a second here. It's on the next slide. Okay, but there's a bunch of different factors that can impact metabolic rates, just like anxiety, fever, basically things that are going to make your body consume more energy. Now, for factors that affect metabolic rate, just like naturally, okay, pretty much all of them have to do with muscle mass in like kind of indirectly. So body size and composition. If you have more muscle mass, you're going to need to burn more calories in order to maintain that muscle mass. So it makes sense if you're larger, you have more muscle mass, right? Gender. Men tend to have less body fat and more muscle than women that are the same age and weight. Therefore, they are going to burn more calories. Just because simply by existing, men have more muscles. Okay? Now, over time, muscle mass is going to decline with age. Because you are losing that muscle mass, you are going to slow your metabolic rate. Okay? So this is just 3 different factors that can have impacts on metabolic weight or metabolic rate there. Okay, pretty much all of them relate to muscle mass. So if you understand how muscle mass impacts the basal metabolic rate, you can put 2 and 2 together, right? Do we need more time on the spot? Yeah. Okay.
No. Where is it about? Is it about our market?
So the brain was listening around and you as your advocate. Those faults, right? Sorry, I like reformat or like I added the medication metabolism in, so I put it like the way under follows it's supposed to like. That was my bad. What are energy the body uses as fuel? Calories. Why? Muscle mass is going to do what with age? Decrease. Why don't you like me? Okay. Looking at hunger and satiety. Okay. You have a control center for hunger and satiety in your hypothalamus. Okay. Your hypothalamus is going to be part of your diencephalon. I'm going to sit underneath your thalamus. Hypothalamus is going to have centers for both hunger and satiety. Now, there's a whole list of hormones here, right? You don't need to memorize all of them. Okay? If you can remember that ghrelin produces hunger, all of the other ones suppress it. So ghrelin is going to produce hunger. Leptin suppresses appetite, makes you feel full. Peptide YY signals satiety, signals that you are full. Insulin also going to suppress appetite. CCK suppresses appetite. The only one that increases hunger is going to be ghrelin. Now, just to like put it into context, right? When is insulin going to be secreted? When your blood sugar is what?
Low.
High, right? So insulin gets secreted when your blood sugar is high. The whole point of insulin is to let that blood sugar into cells. When is your blood sugar going to be high? After you eat. So it made sense, right? Insulin is getting secreted after you eat. So it makes sense that something like insulin is going to suppress your appetite. Okay, so all of these things are getting secreted when you were full or right after you've eaten, stuff like that. Except for growing. And then I have my 2 fat mice because when I was in genetics, we learned about the mice where one of them was not producing leptin, the other one was. The one that wasn't producing leptin just kept eating. So we got really fat, and I just think they're cute. This is the same thing. This is just the image from your textbook. So if you like this image more, it's there for you. If not, that's okay too. Which hormone is going to stimulate the appetite? Still highlighted even. Next, we're going to talk about the difference between macronutrients and micronutrients. Okay. What does macro mean? Big, a lot. Micro means what? Small. We are not talking about the size of the nutrients when we say micro versus macro. Okay. What we are talking about is the amount that we need. So macronutrients, we need large amounts. In micronutrients, we only need small amounts. So things like carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, water, okay, you need large amounts of those in your body. For vitamins and minerals, though, you only need small amounts. So those are going to be micronutrients. So the ones you require large amounts of, macro. Macro means large. Micro means small. Now, there's also a difference between essential and non-essential. Okay? Essential nutrients are going to be obtained through your diet because essential nutrients cannot be made in your body. So it is essential that you eat them. Okay? So essential nutrients obtained through the diet. Non-essential nutrients, it doesn't mean that your body doesn't need them. It still needs them. It's just that these are nutrients that can be made in your body. So it is not essential that you take them in through your diet because your body can make them on your own. So vitamins, I always use the example of vitamins because most of the vitamins in your body most of the vitamins do not get made in your body. There is only one vitamin that gets made in your body. So vitamins are a good example of essential nutrients because most of them you have to take in through your diet. Water is considered what? Macronutrient, right? Because we need a lot of water. So next we're going to talk about digestion as well as like how we use these things in the body. So like the things that say like carbohydrate digestion, these slides are from chapter 1 if you're like reading along the book. So we just move them over to like the mind of 122 because I think this makes a little more sense. Something I always point out, because this isn't technically part of your medical terminology, but I think it helps when you're like connecting the dots between all of these digestive things. If something ends in ASE, it's an enzyme that breaks stuff down. So, most of the time, the first half of the word tells you what it breaks down. So something like sucrase, what do you think sucrase breaks down? Sugar, sucrose, lactase, lactose, maltase, maltose. Okay, so These are good examples of enzymes that are going to break down sugars. The first one we talked about does not follow this rule of thumb, amylase, but it still ends in the ASE, right? ASE, enzymes that break stuff down. So you guys aren't going to be like showing the suffix on your pan open and it's not going to ask you like what it means. It just helps put like these words that you've never seen before as comments. So carbohydrate digestion is going to begin in the mouth with something called amylase. Okay. Now, in the mouth, there's a particular fluid. What is that? Saliva. In your saliva, you have salivary amylase. That just means that it is in the saliva. Okay. As the carbohydrates are being digested and they are moving down. Now, you're going to see these carbohydrates interchangeably called starches and sugars. It's all the same thing. So by the time that this carbohydrate saliva mix has reached the stomach, about half of it has already been digested. Then once the stomach has mixed all of those gastric juices, it's going to move into the small intestine, where you are now going to see pancreatic amylase. Where is pancreatic amylase made? In the pancreas. Okay? But it doesn't move through the pancreas, right? The pancreas is pushing all of its secretions into the small intestine. Eventually, it's going to finish up at the villi with your sucrase, lactase, and maltase, which we're going to talk about on the next slide. Okay? And the final step in digestion, you are going to produce glucose. Okay? Glucose is our most important carbohydrate. I'm going to see why in a second. Okay. Now, the main function of carbohydrates, they are your body's primary energy source. You have two very broad categories, okay? You have simple sugars and complex carbohydrates. These are going to be important when we talk about diabetic nutrition, okay? You've seen a lot of these simple sugars before. You've seen glucose, fructose, galactose, okay? Sucrose, lactose, maltose, also considered simple sugars. The most important of these is going to be glucose, okay? Because glucose is what carbohydrates all get broken down into. And we'll talk about that in a second. But basically what happens, right? Simple sugars have this one ring structure. So a very simple structure. Okay? That ring gets absorbed very, very quickly. It also gets used up quickly. Complex carbohydrates, on the other hand, have like a bunch of rings attached to one another. So it takes the body a little bit more time to break those up, to process them, and to absorb them. Okay? So we'll talk about why this is important when we get to diabetic nutrition, but just so you guys understand, carbohydrates, you have simple sugars and you have complex sugars. This is just like a nice little summary slide about functions of digestion and enzymes that we're going to talk about. So if you prefer like picture form, it's here for you. Now the main the main goal of carbohydrate metabolism is going to be to generate ATP. What is ATP? Energy. Okay. Primary goal of carbohydrate metabolism is to generate ATP. All right. And we know that carbohydrates only get broken down into glucose. Okay. So carbohydrates are all going to get converted to glucose. If you do not need that immediate energy, glucose is going to get stored as glycogen. Okay. So these are the two important like sugar names to know. Glucose and glycogen. The other thing it can do is convert it into lipids. We'll talk about lipids in a second here, but the main the storage form of glucose is going to be glycogen. When your body is not ready, glucose how it's stored. Glycogen. Now, fiber is going to be a group of carbohydrates that resists digestion. Okay. The reason why fiber is important, right? So if you're constipated, your doctor a lot of times is going to recommend a high fiber diet. That is because fiber is going to add bulk to stool. And when you do that, okay, that resists digestion. So when you do that, if we go back to that like squeezing toothpaste out of the toothpaste tube analogy, right? It's a lot easier to squeeze toothpaste out of a full tube than it is to squeeze one out of like a mostly empty, right? So adding bulk to the stool makes it easier to pass out of the body. Now it is going to get fermented by gut bacteria to produce what are called short chain fatty acids. You guys do not need to write that all out. The only thing you need to write SCFAs. Okay? And the reason I point this out, when you do that, you are going to produce gas. So yes, a high fiber diet can make it easier to poop, but it also makes you gassy. And that's why. Okay. Are we good on this slide, or do we need a second? Okay. I think we're going. Okay. Quick side note, right? So we just said enzymes end with ASE, right? What do you think lipase breaks down then? Lipids, right? I don't know if it's accidentally flashed the slide, but lipase is going to break down lipids. Okay, lipids are also called fats. So it is going to start with the secretion of lipase in your mouth. But if you've ever mixed oil and water, right? They do not mix well. Fats do not dissolve in water very well. So this is why bile is important. Okay. When your fat gets into your small intestine, it comes in this congealed mass called a fat globule. What the bile does is the bile is going to come in and it is going to break that up into these really small fat droplets that your bodies can now absorb. So two substances in bile, break up fats into small droplets, then continues with pancreatic lipase. Okay? Some fats get absorbed into the bloodstream, other ones enter the lymphatic system. Okay, but basically gets into your body. This is why people that have had their like gallbladder removed or like have gallstones, they have to be really careful with how they eat and what they eat. Because you don't want to eat high fat meals, right? Because your body can't break that fat up. So now fat is a really good substitute for storing energy. Okay. Fat is actually going to produce way more energy than carbohydrates, but your body is lazy. Okay. It wants to do the least amount of work possible. Lipids take a lot more work to release that energy. So their primary function is to be a reservoir of excess energy. But your body's first like go-to for energy is going to be carbohydrates. So fats reservoir of excess energy. It is going to enable the absorption of certain vitamins. So we're going to talk about fat soluble versus water soluble vitamins in a little bit. It's going to contribute to cellular structure, and it will insulate and protect the body. Now we have two like very broad categories of fats. Okay. We're going to have saturated fats and unsaturated fats. Saturated fats are going to be coming from animals and they tend to be solid at room temperature. So stuff like butter, Crisco, hydrogenated oils. Okay, those are all examples of saturated fats. Unsaturated fats, on the other hand, these are going to come from nuts, seeds, and vegetable oils. And these are going to tend to be in liquid form at room temperature. Okay. So things like vegetable oil, avocado oil, rapeseed oil, these are all going to be unsaturated fats. Now, an exception to this kind of is coconut oil. Because if you buy coconut oil, right, it's going to be in like a solid form. If you buy coconut oil down in Grenada, it is liquid because they keep their stores at like 75 degrees there, 75, 80 degrees. Okay, so when you buy it off the shelf in Grenada, it is liquid. The stores here are all about like, I don't know, 60, 65 inside. So it's solid because it's below that melting point of coconut oils. But coconut oil is still an unsaturated fat. Now, in an ideal world, fat should not comprise more than 30% of your diet. Okay, as long as you have 30% written down, you're good. You don't need to write down no more than 20% saturated fat. It's good to know, but you guys are already trying to have a bunch of knowledge. I need to stop touching the thing. Keep shocking me. So, lipid metabolism, like I said, it's going to produce twice as much energy as the breakdown of carbohydrates, but requires more effort. So, your body's lazy, it wants to do the easiest thing possible. Adipose tissue is just another name for fat tissue. Now we're going to talk about ketoacidosis in the context of diabetes, but just to introduce you guys to it, okay? Ketoacidosis has to do with fat metabolism. When your body is rapidly metabolizing fat, what it's going to do is it's going to produce these things called ketone bodies. Ketone bodies, when they accumulate, they can cause a pH imbalance called ketoacidosis. And we'll talk about why this relates to diabetes when we get to diabetic nutrition. What types of fats are derived from animal sources? Saturated. What's an example of saturated fat? Butter. Unsaturated fats are coming from what? Nuts, seeds, vegetables, vegetable oils. Protein digestion. Okay. Protein digestion is going to use proteases. So again, we're seeing that ASE. Okay. Protein for protein. Okay. Now, protein digestion does not begin in the mouth. It begins in the stomach. Okay. We do not have proteases in our saliva. So it's going to begin in the stomach with this protease called pepsin. Fun fact, apparently Pepsi was created to like replace pepsin in your stomach as like a supplement, but I didn't know that until I started working here. So. Now, when chyme enters the duodenum, pepsin gets inactivated. So just as a reminder, okay, a food bolus plus what equals chyme? Starts with a G. Gastric juices. Okay, so chyme is a combination of that food bolus plus gastric juices. A food bolus is made up of food and what? Saliva. Okay, so when chyme enters the duodenum, right, pepsin is going to get inactivated. It is going to get taken over with trypsin and chymotrypsin or chymotrypsin. So continues in the duodenum with trypsin and chymotrypsin. Then it is going to finish up in the small intestine with peptidases, and it will result in these things called amino acids. Now, what the structure of proteins, right? We didn't talk about this in chapter 2 this semester. Proteins are made up of these things called amino acids. The way that I like to explain them is it's like a charm bracelet, where each one of those charms is a different amino acid. Okay? So you only actually have 20 amino acids in your body, but the way that they are arranged gives you over 100,000 different proteins. Okay? Now, the reason why we talk about amino acids briefly, we have two different types of proteins. We are going to have complete proteins and we have incomplete proteins. Complete proteins are going to have all of the amino acids their body needs. So, these a lot of the time are going to come from animal sources, which makes sense, right? Chances are a cow is going to go through a lot of the same metabolic processes that we do. So they probably need very similar proteins. Incomplete proteins are more going to come from plants. All right. So this is what I always say. A lot of people that are vegan aren't necessarily like the most nourished, I guess is a good word. They're like not always the healthiest because they'll be like, I'm getting plenty of protein in my diet, which like they might be, but they might also only be taking in incomplete proteins. Okay. They need to be taking in complete proteins, which like you can do like soy or quinoa, stuff like that. But you need to like do a lot of research, right? So taking that into account when you take into account like your protein source or protein type. So just 20 different amino acids. Okay, complete proteins, incomplete proteins. Cool. Now, proteins are going to be used to build tissue. All right. And the way this works, we take that steak in. Okay. That steak is going to be broken down into its individual amino acids. And it is going to be built back up into new proteins. Okay. So it gets broken down and it gets recombined. So breaking down is going to be catabolism. Rebuilding is anabolism. The way that I remember it, that's break things. So catabolism, breaking things. It's a reach, but it's something. And then anabolism is the other thing. So once they have been catabolized, they can also be converted to glucose and fat or used directly as a fuel source. However, in order for this to happen, they need to get altered in the liver first. Okay? And when they get altered into the liver, when they get altered in the liver, okay, they're going to produce ammonia. Well, so they can get broken down into ammonia and a keto acid. Keto acids, we just talked about, right? They can become energy, glucose, or fat. Ammonia. Ammonia has nitrogen in it. Okay? Ammonia, if it builds up in your cells, is toxic. So ammonia gets secreted in your urine. That is what gives urine its smell. The reason why I point out ammonia has nitrogen in it, because next we're going to talk about nitrogen balance. Okay? When we talk about the amount of protein excreted, what we are looking at specifically is the concentration of this ammonia in your urine, aka the amount of nitrogen in your urine. Okay? So nitrogen balance is the same thing as protein balance. So this is all of that right now. Now, most healthy adults are going to be in what's called nitrogen balance, aka protein balance. Okay? What this is, when the amount of nitrogen consumed equals the amount of nitrogen excreted. Okay? So you are maintaining at this point. Right, so you were taking in enough protein to like meet your nutritional needs, but it's also getting excreted at a regular rate. Okay, so you are not needing to rely on other sources for this protein or using up more than what you're taking in. So nitrogen balance is when nitrogen consumed equals the nitrogen excreted. Now, negative nitrogen balance, okay? Negative nitrogen balance is going to be when more nitrogen is excreted when you consume it, okay? So a lot of the time this is happening because we're not eating enough protein to meet your nutritional needs. So it's going to happen in cases like cancer or muscular dystrophy. It can also happen in malnourishment. So basically what happens is you are not eating enough protein. So your body literally starts to eat away at your own muscles. And when it does that, okay, you are going to get ammonia as the byproduct, meaning you are going to be excreting a lot of that nitrogen, right? You're going to be getting rid of those byproducts of that protein. So you'll see this in cases like cancer and muscular dystrophy, right? Things that are like wasting away. So bad things, negative. Positive nitrogen balance, on the other hand. The main goal of protein is to do what again? Build tissue, okay? Positive nitrogen balance is going to be when you are using up more protein, when you are using up more protein than you are excreting. Yeah, that's right, sorry. So this is going to happen in periods of growth. So if you start going to the gym, right, you're working out, you're building that muscle tissue, the demand for that protein is going to increase because you are building tissue. So you're going to be excreting less of it because your body needs more of it. During pregnancy, you're growing a whole fetus, right? So your body needs protein to build that fetus. Or when we're recovering from a wasting illness. So if somebody has been bedridden for months or like they were in a coma or something, right? They shoot up that muscle mass. Now they need to rebuild it. So next we're going to talk about diabetic nutrition to like tie everything together, right? Because as nurses, you guys are going to see diabetes a lot. Okay. I think it's like the most common thing in the United States. If hypertension is not, I don't remember which one, but you'll see a lot. So starting with carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are really important when you talk about diabetic nutrition. When you educate patients, okay, you want to be recommending that they eat complex carbohydrates. Okay, because things like simple sugars, these are going to be broken down super, super quickly. So basically, you're getting like a huge rush. So the body doesn't have time to process it. So it places an extra demand on insulin. Your body is already like not doing super great with insulin, right? So you don't want to overwhelm the insulin that you do have, that you are injecting. Complex carbohydrates, on the other hand, right? I just showed you that structure. You have multiple rings, so it takes more time for them to be broken down. So eating complex carbohydrates, this is going to prevent spikes and crashes in the blood sugar and keep energy steady. Simple sugars, those are going to cause those like sugar rushes. Now, body converts most carbs into glucose. We already talked about this, right? The whole purpose of insulin is to allow glucose to enter the cells for energy. Okay, so the way that works, it basically acts like a key. So you have your insulin receptor. When the insulin receptor is inserted, the insulin is inserted in the insulin receptor, glucose is allowed to enter the cell. You have a couple different types of diabetes. Type 1 is when your pancreas is not producing the insulin. Type 2 is when your cells are not responding to the insulin properly. So this can be some genetic thing. It can happen due to nutrition, anything like that. Okay, but basically your insulin is not working properly, so your glucose cannot get into your cells. If your glucose cannot get into your cells, it's going to stay in the blood. When it stays in the blood, this is going to cause hyperglycemia, so high blood sugar. Now, if glucose is not getting into cells, the body is then going to start breaking down fat, right? Because it still needs energy. So it's going to start breaking down fat. And when it breaks down that fat, right, you are going to produce ketones. Too many ketones can lower the blood pH, okay? And when you lower that blood pH, it leads to something called diabetic ketoacidosis, right? Because acid, low pH, so abbreviated DKA, right? In DKA, you're going to see patients with pretty breath, deep breathing, nausea, and confusion. This is a medical emergency. Patients need to be seen. It needs to be taken care of. Now, the one that you should look out for, fruity breath. Okay? Because you're going to see deep breathing, nausea, and confusion in quite a few things, right? If somebody has a UTI, sometimes you can see confusion and nausea. If somebody has a concussion, you can see all three of these. Somebody has a stroke, again, you can see all three of these. Fruity breath, you're pretty much only going to see a diabetic ketoacidosis. Okay? But you're not going to walk up to a patient and tell them to like breathe in your face, right? So, knowing the other signs, very important. Now, in terms of responsibilities for LPN, oh, wait, sorry, protein and fat. Proteins and fats are still really important in diabetes, right? Because you don't want to be taking in so much protein, because you can like help replace carbs to a certain extent, but if you're eating too much protein, it can strain your kidneys. So something like the keto diet, it does work. Over time though, it can impact your kidneys, right? Healthy fats get encouraged in moderation, but you don't want to take in too much fat because people with diabetes that are at a much higher risk for heart disease. So things like hypertension or myocardial infarctions, so heart attacks. Okay, stuff like that. Now, key teaching points about diabetic nutrition for you guys. You want to encourage consistent carbohydrate intake. Okay? You want to emphasize those fiber-rich foods because it's going to slow that glucose absorption and it's going to support healthy gut health. Gut health. All right? Most importantly, probably, you want to pay attention to the signs of hypoglycemia and hyperglycemia. What does hypo mean? Low sugar. Hyper means high sugar. Okay. So with low sugar, you'll see things like shakiness, sweating, confusion, hyperglycemia, thirst, frequent urination, fatigue, because your body is trying to like produce more urine to try and like get rid of some of the sugar. Basically, you'll see diabetes a lot. So. Okay. Protein metabolism serves what purpose? Is that the only one? All of the above, right? Because in proteins, we are both breaking things down and rebuilding them. Now with vitamins, okay? So looking at vitamins, I already told you guys, right? Most vitamins are going to be essential nutrients because you need to take them in. There's only one vitamin that your body produces. We talked about it in chapter 6. It's vitamin D. All the other vitamins need to be used. So vitamin D, formed in the skin. First, you have water-soluble vitamins. With water-soluble vitamins, they get absorbed quickly and they get excreted quickly, right? Because you are continuously producing urine. So because you're getting rid of those water-soluble vitamins like very frequently, your risk of toxicity with these is pretty slight. So you don't have to be as concerned with toxicity in water-soluble vitamins because you're constantly getting rid of them. Okay? Fat-soluble vitamins, on the other hand, when these come into your body, they can get stored in your liver and fat tissues. And because they're getting stored, okay, you can keep building on your stores and cause toxicity a lot easier than water-soluble vitamins. So it's a lot easier to like overdose on fat-soluble vitamins. Now there are only 4 fat-soluble vitamins. You have A, D, E, and K. Okay? Everything else is water-soluble. So just memorize those 4. So if I say vitamin B12, what vitamin is that? Water-soluble. What about vitamin C? Water-soluble. What about vitamin B15? Fat. Okay? So just remember A, D, E, and K, fat-soluble. Everything else is going to be water-soluble. What kind of vitamins are absorbed with diet? Fat-soluble. Next, looking at minerals. Okay, the way that I think of minerals, they are essentially salts. Okay, minerals are going to be used for a whole bunch of different vital functions in your body, like brain function, nerve conduction, heart contraction, red blood cell formation. This semester we didn't really focus on the like super in-depth physiology of these things. Okay, the one that we did talk about is minerals in bone formation. So part of the reason, the most abundant minerals in the body are going to be calcium and phosphorus. Okay, so just knowing that minerals are important in the body, these are the 2 that are most important. But we didn't really talk too much about like the exact mechanics of minerals, but I'll stress it. Now, as you get older, a lot of elderly adults are going to be at a higher risk for nutritional deficiency. That is not because your metabolic needs have increased or anything. They stay the same throughout your life. What changes is how your body absorbs these nutrients. Okay, so just if you're working with older populations, just knowing that they have a higher risk of that nutritional deficiency. Next, we're going to talk about thermoregulation. Okay, now your body temperature is going to normally fluctuate, okay, but you want to keep that heat in a very narrow range. This process is called thermoregulation. Thermoregulation is an example of what? We talked about it in chapter 1. Starts with an H. Homeostasis. Right? So thermoregulation is an example of homeostasis. We have 3 methods of heat transfer. I like the word transfer better than heat loss, but that's just me being a little particular. Okay? So 3 methods of heat transfer. First one is going to be radiation. Okay? Radiation, if you go stand out inside in the sunlight, not today obviously, but if you go stand outside in the sun, eventually you're going to start to get hot. Okay, that is because the sun is sending these electromagnetic waves through the air. Okay, so transfer of heat through the air. Conduction, if you stick a metal spoon in boiling water, and then you touch that spoon, it is going to be hot. Conduction is transfer of heat between 2 materials that are touching. Evaporation, on the other hand, evaporation is going to change water into gas. So using that to like change the phase of water. You're going to measure temperature through two different, like, there's two categories of temperature measurement. Okay. You have a core temperature, which is going to be measuring temperature on the inside of your body. So you can use a rectal thermometer to do this, or you have a shell temperature. The shell temperature is going to be on the outside of your body. Okay. So you can use the shell temperature with an oral thermometer. Okay. Or like one of these like forehead scanning ones. Now, you also have a center in your brain that is responsible for keeping track of your body temperature. Okay, so your hypothalamus is your body's thermostat. All right, so this is going to be what keeps track of it. Now, when your temperature rises, we talked about these in chapter 6, right? When your body temperature rises, your blood vessels are going to dilate. What this is going to do, this is going to bring the blood closer to your skin and allow you to let go of some of that heat through the skin. The other thing that happens, you start to sweat. And as you're releasing heat through the skin, that heat is going to cause the water to change into gas. Okay, so it is going to cause that evaporation. So body temperature rises, you lose heat, blood vessels dilate, heat loss through the skin, and you evaporate sweat. So the thermostat's going to be like hypothalamus. Now, when your body temperature drops, okay, so your body temperature falls below normal, what happens is your blood vessels are now going to constrict. This is going to keep the warm blood inside of your body. The other thing that happens, okay, you're going to start to shiver. What that does is causes your muscles to do activity, okay? And as your muscles are doing that activity, they are producing heat as that byproduct. It's just like if you're working out, right? You start to get hot. Last thing, I want you guys to add these two terms to your packet. I just forgot to include them. They're pretty straightforward. Hypothermia, hypo means low. Thermia, you're talking about temperature. Hyperthermia, high temperature. So pretty straightforward, but I want you guys to have that written down somewhere. Okay. And I'll come back to this slide so that I can do the MCQ. And then we'll go on break / use more packets. Which of the following is not a way your body loses heat? Metabolism. If your body temperature rises, your blood vessels would dilate. Okay. So I'll leave this up. You guys are welcome to go on break and come back and work on your packets. Like I said, today is the last day we meet in person. But I encourage you guys to hang around, look through the packet at least. That way, if you have questions, you have the chance to ask them now. Okay, or if you have questions about like grading or anything like that. Okay. No, just until the exam. Yeah, not for the rest of the semester, just until the exam. Sorry, you guys have to deal with it times. But we are getting close to the end. Like we have this week, we have our exam next week, and then we have one day that week of Thanksgiving, and then we meet two more times after Thanksgiving, and then that's it.
Is our final going to be on everything on the timeline?
Yeah, so your final is going to be 75 questions total. It's going to be on all the chapters. Usually the split is like about 50 questions from exams 1 through 3, 10 from the last 3 chapters, and then 5 on Pan Open. So but I can't guarantee that's the exact divide. That's just like about what it is. My goal is to have like the final exam done. And the packets done like before Thanksgiving, so that way you guys have that like extra time to study over Thanksgiving. Because I know that's what everybody wants to do on vacation, but that way you guys have a little extra time.
Are you going to tell us where it was supposed to get?
So you can calculate that on Brightspace. If you go to like the like homepage and scroll all the way down, there's like a exam score update on there. So yeah.
And then I got the 10-year sheet.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Did everybody sign in? Oh, packet. Yeah, there's also like freshmen there. I don't know if I tore the last page off. I didn't. Yep. And remember, if you printed out the packet on your own, I have multiple choice questions that we're gonna do on Thursday in that one, so make sure you get those. Do the calculations? Yeah, let me just close this out so that the recording stops. Thank you.